Well, welcome everyone to another installment of our iSpring Solutions Leadership Series. And today we have a very appropriate topic for this series because we have Karen Hyder from Kaleidoscope Training and Consulting. And Karen is going to share with us how to actually create more engaging virtual training sessions, whether that's webinars, Google Hangouts, or what have you. So, welcome, Karen, and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Hi, Gina. It's great to connect with you today. Thanks so much for inviting me. Well, as you know, my background is in training. I spent many years as a classroom training, teaching people to click and double click for the first time back in the early days of people using Windows. And then I moved into a role as an online trainer in 1999. So I was a pretty early adopter of a product called Placeware, which became Microsoft Live Meeting. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that product. But since then, I've been working with tools like Adobe Connect and WebEx and GoToTraining, and I've been using these different tools to support other people's online events as well as my own training. So I help other people produce their webinars or their online training programs, and then I do my own train the trainer type courses as well.
Which I know, like me, we've attended a lot of webinars in our time, and we've seen a lot of, let's say, not so great webinars. And now we're starting to see people finally get, okay, this is how to put on a better webinar. And so I love this topic. It's just so appropriate for all of us. And I'm going to actually look at one of these because I want to first just start out a basic one of, what are some tips for all of us to create and produce better webinars?
Well, one tip I'm going to give myself is figure out where to look, because I'm looking at your image in the lower right as you talk, and I'm looking at the tools that I have available here. So I know that just my movements can be distracting to my participants, but I think one of the key things that we can do is to find ways to engage learners using the features of the software interface. So if this tool has a chat function, instead of just ignoring the participants who are connected, I might say, hey, as you're joining the session, please type a greeting in the chat that you see on the right side of the screen. And so as participants hear me invite them to do that, the messages come in and I'm able to say, hey, great, Fred, thanks so much for joining. And Steve, oh, it's terrific to hear from you. And oh, Dave, I'm sorry to hear that it's snowing where you are. So it starts to feel a little bit more like a discussion. And once you can open up the discussion and give people an opportunity to communicate without interrupting you, because a lot of times people don't speak because they just don't want to interrupt, but you're creating that dialogue instead of making it a one direction presentation.
Which I love. And we're of course we're using Google Hangouts, which has a Q&A feature. So if anyone is on the Google Plus page and you have a question or a comment, or just introduce yourself. So like Karen said, so we can give you a shout out. You can just click on that Q&A and type away. You'll see, and then it pops up on our screen here. And then any questions that come in that perhaps some people are sending via Twitter, or maybe they're putting them on the Google Plus page. If we don't get to those, we'll answer those after. But yeah, I love the more interactive, the better. So is that one of the primary tips? And do you think all presenters, is it hard for presenters to get used to that?
You know, I think it is the primary recommendation. Of course, I could talk about recommendations all day long after 15 years of doing this, but I think most presenters can come around to that way of thinking once they recognize that trying to control the situation is not your primary goal.
Right.
It's not important that you control what participants do, but to give them parameters to work within so that they can contribute to this live discussion. If we're doing it live, we want to hear from people live, right? Otherwise, why not just record it and post the recording later? So if what you want is control, don't bother to do it live.
Right. That's a great point. If you're going to do it live, take questions, encourage that engagement. Now, Karen, you're an online event producer.
Mhm.
Why is it important, or what role does a producer play? Why is it important for people to have a producer?
You know, I think for some people, the idea of having a helper seems like they're not capable of doing the job. But even as a producer and a trainer myself, I know that there are times when I'm in a training class and I'm on a roll, I'm given my shtick. You know, I got my description, my story, my step-by-step instructions. And if at that moment something happens to the technology, I have to stop what I'm doing, focus on something else, possibly try to talk over what I'm doing, which now sounds confusing and muddled. And maybe I can solve the problem in 30 seconds. Maybe it takes 5 minutes. Meanwhile, the participants are thinking, what's
What's
happening
going
here?
on?
Why, you were right in the middle of explaining something and now you're off. So I find that it's really challenging to do both roles at the same time. And if no technology problems ever happened, then maybe you wouldn't need a producer. But we know that that's not realistic.
Yeah, we know that's not true.
Yeah.
Which is one of the questions I had down is, what do you do when things go wrong? How do you handle technology issues?
I work under the assumption that everything will go wrong all the time. And that paranoia drives me to create backup methods. You know, if I were in the military, I wouldn't go into something with just one option. I would have 3 or 4 possible solutions to solve problems that I'm very likely to encounter along the way. So what I like to do is go into something, I like to do multiple prep sessions with all the players involved so we can identify what are the likely problems and what are the reasonable solutions. This is our plan A solution, this is our plan B solution, and this is our plan C solution.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, just being prepared. What happens when things go wrong? Because you're right, they will. Something will. Like, we've been having issues on my end with the Google Hangout this morning. For some reason, my little lower third, my name and stuff isn't showing up, and whether the video is, but you just keep going and you say, okay, what is, I like yours, plan B, plan C. There's what, 26 letters that we can keep going. So having those. Well, what do you see as some of, I hate to say, what are some of the mistakes that people make doing webinars? Maybe flipping it as, what are things that we can do? Some tips to create better webinar experiences.
Let me answer both questions. The first one is I think the mistake that we make is assuming it's easier than it is. I know how to use Hangouts. I know how to use Connect. I know how to use GoToWebinar. It's not that hard. I had a client one time say to me, Karen, what's the big deal? I use WebEx all the time. I just throw up slides and then I talk over the slides and then participants ask questions and that's it. And my joke was, it's the throwing up part that we're trying to avoid. You know, you can do it, but is it good? Is it
Right.
engaging? Is it worth it? Is it worth it to do it live and make everybody jump through hoops to be there at a particular date and time, sometimes in the middle of the night for them? So if you're going to do it well. And the mistake we make is assuming that the best solution is just throwing up slides and talking over them. In
Right.
fact, you know, SlideShare works perfectly well for that kind of thing. Put your slides there, people can read them. We don't need to commit to a time. The other thing, or the second part of your question, was how can we do it better? And I would say be very, very realistic about what you're dealing with here. What kind of connections are the users going to be on? What kind of hardware are they using? Is it PC or Mac? Are they using a headset or are they dialing in with the phone? How do you expect them to contribute to the discussion? Are they typing in chat? Are they communicating verbally? How do they know that? When do you communicate those details to them? And I would say redundancy is good. Send them details in the email ahead of the session. Send them details in the splash screen that comes up before the session. Give them details in a tutorial at the beginning of the session. And when you ask them a question, give them specific instructions on how to respond to the question. If you do those things, I promise you, your online events will go much better.
That's, yeah, again, being more prepared all the way around and helping that. Equipment wise, do you find that there's certain pieces of equipment that you should have when you're doing webinars?
As a rule of thumb, I always recommend that you use a wired internet connection, but I have to admit, because I live out in cow country here in New York State, a wired connection is not an option for me in my home office where I am most days. I've been running on a 4G connection for a while, and while it has moments of inconsistency, those moments are equal to my wired connection when I go to a rented space in town where I sometimes go when I really, really need the best possible connection.
That's interesting. Yeah, but you're right now. We've got video and audio streaming, and you're on. You said 3G or 4G?
4G, yeah, I mean, I just paid my Verizon bill. I'm happy to have 4G out here in the wilderness.
Yeah, thank goodness.
But
And
hardware-wise,
then
you run. Oh, I just
go
wanted to
ahead.
mention about like Macs and PCs. We'll run into little funny things like in Adobe Connect, onboard mics in Mac computers tend to take priority and they do not change over to headset no matter how many times we try to change it. So it's like, I don't know why that is. I just work around it.
That is interesting because I always have a mic or a headset handy. I use a Mac, which tends to not have the same issues as far as feedback. But if there's echo in a line when there's more than one person on a hangout or during a webinar, sometimes you'll have echo or feedback, and I always say just have an earbud or headset handy.
Yeah.
Yours looks like a
And
really nice one. What are you using?
it's a Plantronics. It's kind of old, actually,
Okay.
but I tend to go for the very heavy over the ears for the noise canceling on my side, so I'm not distracted by things around me. But I think anything around the $30 to $40 mark is good. In fact, I saw an e-learning guild event a couple of months ago where the presenter was saying sometimes a higher quality headset gives worse results because it doesn't reconcile with the software very well. So you end up having, like gain problems.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
It is interesting.
I know you're always looking for, and some people think you need real expensive equipment. It's not necessarily that it has to be expensive equipment. You just have to have, again, test them before. Like you said, yeah, I always tell people test your equipment and your connection at the same place you're going to be doing the event the day of. Some people test it in one place and then the day of the event, they're logging in from home or they're logging in from somewhere else.
Yeah, and don't make any assumptions at all. I can't tell you how often people say, gee, Karen, I don't know why my headset isn't working here in Connect. I use it every day in Skype. Okay, well, Connect doesn't know about that headset, so you've got to point to where it is listed in the hardware settings.
Right.
It has nothing to do with Skype. I mean, it's great that you know that the headset isn't broken and the plug that you're plugged into is functioning, but there's no guarantees of anything.
That's right. Yeah, with technology, you never want to assume anything. Well, here's a great question that someone else had asked too. And then, how do you get participants to participate? I know earlier you said just asking them to, but sometimes during a webinar, people are multitasking. And what are some of your tips for getting participants to participate?
I have a really strong one that for some people seems a little obnoxious, maybe, but I find it's really helpful. Right? Will you agree to participate? Yes, no, maybe. Or maybe make it funnier, like, of course, yes. Or
Mhm.
I'm not so sure because I'm multitasking, or maybe I have other things distracting me right now. So I know where I stand with people. If they're not paying attention, fine. I won't expect a lot of feedback in chat. But if they told me at the beginning that they were going to agree to participate, then I can use that later on and say, remember earlier when I asked you to agree and you said you would? Here's your chance.
Here's your chance. And I know some webinar tools have features that show you the engagement level. Are there any that are kind of preferred by you?
I find those controllers to be not accurate because if you're in another screen or you have Word open where you're taking notes, it gives me false information.
Oh,
The only information I trust is what I'm seeing in chat, how people are responding to polls, and whether or not people are using green check mark or red X kind of features.
right.
So that's the technique I use, and it's pretty powerful.
Okay, so I have a question. I feel like when people are speaking at a live event, they use one voice, and when they get on a webinar to present, it tends to be that they go into a reading mode. As a presenter, what tips do you have? Because I always tell people to picture that you're talking to a little person in your camera, but how do you prevent that?
It has a lot to do with creating a script, but not reading the script, instead memorizing the phrasing and the way that you wanted to explain something. Certainly as a trainer, I have certain things that you'll hear me say every time,
Right.
but from one time to the next, you wouldn't notice that because I've threaded it into my own verbiage and my own flow of messaging. So it's not easy, but practice certainly helps. Record yourself and play it back. A bad recording is enough to scare you into a different kind of behavior.
That's very true. Nothing like real feedback to cause change.
Yeah,
I always tell people you'll need therapy after the first couple times of hearing yourself on a webinar and seeing yourself on camera, but just get over it. It's what you look like, it's what you sound like.
exactly. That is what you look like and sound like, yeah.
Well, this is fascinating, and I wish we had more time to keep going on this. But Karen, if somebody wants to hire you to help them produce webinars or give kind of come in and give their group some tips and things, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, you can contact me at Karen@KarenHyder.com. That's Karen at KarenHyder.com. Um, and I'm usually available right there to answer questions that you have or to provide training or just to, how do you approach a project like this? I'm happy to help you get started with that conversation.
That's awesome. Well, Karen, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will have this up on our YouTube channel for iSpring. And within a few minutes, it loads up there. So I'll send you the link and we can share this with the world because the world needs to be doing better webinars.
I agree. Please, you're giving us a bad name out there, so shape up.
Exactly. Shape up, people. Hire Karen. That's what you need to do.
Thanks so much, Gina. It was so great to talk to you. Have a great rest of the day.
You.